Welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast, where we talk about how to build your practice from startup to scale up while being the kind of coach your clients crave. Finally, a podcast for financial coaches. Here are your hosts, Maria Casillas and Cody Sizemore.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Financial Coaches Podcast. I'm excited to be here today with my co-host, Cody. And today we're going to talk about your most powerful asset, your origin story. And I'm so grateful that Cody's going to bring to us today just a personal example of a post that he originally did. And it was pretty recent. It was actually quite successful for him. I'm sure that's shocking for all of you because we know what an amazing social media person Cody is. But he actually had a recent conversation with another coach about this post and what came of that. And I would love for him to share his story with us today and a little bit of a formula as to how you, our listeners, can also take this information and craft your own origin story. So welcome, Cody. Thanks so much for coming back today. You always show up like a steady co-host for me. So thank you.
Well, my pleasure. Yeah, so we were talking about what we wanted to talk about today. And, I actually hopped on a call with one of our listeners last night and was discussing a lot of things that they could kind of work on to kind of get stuff off the ground. Mm-hmm. And this was one of the things that came up in the conversation. And I was like, this might be something that is good to talk about on the podcast just in general.
Yeah.
And we've talked about something similar to this in the past, but we never really took a deep dive into it and really showcase that kind of formula that you kind of said.
Yeah.
And what kind of results can come from it too. And I just figured that this would be a really good opportunity to talk about it. So
awesome. Well, thanks for bringing it. So so tell us a little bit about the post that you are referencing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I made a post about a week ago, and it was something that I had put a lot of effort into. It's a rather longer post, but even with it being long, the way that I wrote it and kind of following this formula that I'm going to unpack for you, I had several people message me. There's several people who commented on it, but I had several people reach out to me directly, and they just said, dude, thank you so much for even just putting that out there, because that made me feel like I wasn't alone, and I really enjoyed the read and all this kind of stuff. And because of that, because it kind of had that effect on people, I ended up generating I think almost 10 consultations from this one post.
Amazing.
And I had one yesterday, and they said the same thing. They said we were kind of digging into things, and they said the reason we reached out to you was because of that post that you made, and it made me feel like I was dealing with the same thing, and I know exactly where you're coming from because that's me, and that's what made me feel comfortable to reach out to you. So this is a really, really powerful thing, and that's why we're kind of calling this your most powerful asset, because there's a lot of things that you can do as a coach to have really good results, but there's something about your own personal story and you being able to be vulnerable that allows people to connect with you.
Yes. I agree.
And that connection is really, really what people look for. They look for people that they can identify with, that they can trust, and I think that's something that does go overlooked a lot of times because we focus a lot on the results. This is what I can do for you. This is what I can do for you. This is what you'll get. This is what you'll get. But unless people know who they're talking to, they might not want to talk to you at all.
Right. Especially about this topic. It's such a vulnerable, private topic for a lot of people. So I can see that. You mentioned the idea that we talk about, what we can do for them and the results and all that stuff. And it reminds me of something I wanted to say before we unpack this formula. And that is that you mentioned you put a lot of work into this post. And I think a lot of times when, myself included, whether it's our listeners or just whoever, we hear something, we're like, oh, Cody put out a post and Cody got 10 consultations. And so we hear point A, we hear point D, and we're like, I want to put out a post and get 10 consultations, but we forget about the work that had to go into it in order for that post to be a good post. So I just want people to rehear that and go, you know what? It took a long time to craft that post. And so it's not just something where you're going to hop on, you're going to take this formula and go, I'm just going to create this real quick and then I'm going to get something from it. Take the time, you guys, to actually do the work that Cody's going to unpack for us today and then try it, right? Don't expect these results right away.
Yeah. And what I want to say is this is not like a course. Mm-hmm. This is not a tool. This is not a freebie. This is not an asset. It's not anything like that. It's simply just a post, right? But even with that being said, I knew that this post could be powerful, and I knew that I didn't want to just like throw something up. I wanted to like nurture it and take care of it. So when I say I spent a lot of time on it, I spent about a week drafting this post, typing it up, brainstorming, refining it, changing the language within it, getting the photo for it, like all of those different types of things and all those elements. It was very intentional, and it paid off.
Yeah. You know? And here's the other thing too. I know that you just said it's just a post, and yet that's what you made it for, right? You didn't make it to hand out or anything. However, because it resonated so well with your audience, and you have it in typed writing, you can pull from that all of those little elements that people really resonated with and then use that for future posts. You don't have to keep it where it's the really long one. You can pull from that and say, oh, I'm just going to use this little clip or this snippet. And it's talking to your audience because of the results that you got from that one post. So, as people are listening to, I have to put a whole week into just one post. Yes, and it's going to actually generate a lot more content for you later on down the road.
Yeah. And what we'll do, in case anyone wants to read the post or see how it's written or the photo that I use, everything like that, we'll put a link to the actual post in the show notes. That way I don't have to read everything and take a bunch of time to do that. Yeah. But if you want to see it for yourself and kind of like dissect it, you'll be able to check that out in the show notes.
Great idea.
Once you're done listening to the episode. So.
All right, cool. I love the picture.
So there's a few elements to this. Before I dive into the formula, I want to start with just like the content. So what I mean by content is like this is not just like a written post. It can be. There's no reason why it couldn't be that. But I also accompanied it with a photo as well. And it was a photo that, I did with a buddy of mine. He's actually one of my best friends. He's a super good photographer. And we have like a certain deal set up to where I help him out. He helps me out. And, we kind of just scratch each other's backs. And with this one in particular, I knew that I was working on the actual copy for it, like the actual writing of it. And I told him, I'm like, I want to do something that I've never done before. And I want something that's going to be attention-stopping, eye-catching, almost kind of like, in a way, like controversial in a way, to like really make people stop, So he actually had the idea. He has like a briefcase full of prop money, so fake money, and he was like, dude, why don't we have you just like burn some money?
It's such a cool photo, you guys.
Dude. And I was like, yes, that sounds awesome. So we did it, and we captured this awesome photo. And honestly, like, if I ever wrote a book, that's probably the cover of the book. like it's like that cool.
And the prop money looks so real. I'm going to interject because I stopped, right? I'm scrolling and I stopped, and I'm like, okay, I know. First of all, I know it's not Monopoly money. Like you can tell it's not that kind of prop, right? Because it looks real. It absolutely looks real. And then I'm like, I had several Cody.
People message me. Yeah, I had several people message me, and they're like, please tell me that's not real money. Well, one, because that would suck, and two, because that's a federal offense. And I'm like, it's not real money.
So you guys, if I come to you next week alone, that's because Cody's in jail. But no, I was going to say, I know you enough to know you are not actually setting hundreds of dollars on fire.
No.
So I'm like, I wonder if there's like a cool Photoshop thing where, you can kind of make it look like that. So I'm actually very intrigued today to find out that it was not Photoshopped. Actually, it was really on fire and you were actually holding that stack of cash. That's pretty cool. So thank God you didn't burn yourself, right? I mean, didn't catch your goatee or... No, but that was actually very, very cool.
Yeah. So with that being said, I know that not everyone has access to, a professional photographer, but even if you don't, you can certainly do your research in your area and link up with one.
Okay.
Some of them are more expensive than others.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that if you're able to talk to the right one and maybe just tell them what you do, why you do it, it might resonate with them and they might want to try and help you out in some way. And we can talk further on building a relationship with the photographer, maybe on a different episode.
Okay.
Because I think that's really, really important. That's a super key part in your marketing is having a really good content creator behind you.
Mm-hmm.
So do your research, reach out to people, feel them out and see if you can work something up for that, because I do think it's a really important part. But moving into this formula. So, like we said, this is called a origin story, and I'm actually going to pull up the formula. And really, it comes down to 6 separate parts. And the way that it's structured is the very first thing that you would want to do. And maybe you could even save this for the last if you really wanted to, if you wanted to write everything out and then just get a general theme to pull from this to make a really powerful statement. But one of the first things that you would want to consider, and even that you'll see in the post, is the hook. Okay, the hook is what it's what hooks people in. It's what keeps people reading. And it should not be long. It should be one short sentence, but something that's very powerful, something that's emotional, and something that really draws a person in, right? So, for example, on my post in particular, and this is I use the same hook as the one I had done before that we talked about.
If it's not broken, don't fix it.
That's right. It worked so well, and I was
right.
might as well do it again.
Yep.
So, I used my dream died because of money. Right, and I even put out another post 2 days ago that used a similar hook, but it was different. It was a picture of me holding an axe, and I said something along the lines of you need to kill your debt, or something like that, right? So those words, die, kill, while
you're gonna end up in prison for real. I can.
I know. They're rather dark words, but the whole point is that they're very emotional words.
Yeah.
And it captures people's attention, and that's the whole goal with the hook. So that's the first piece that you would need, is just a very quick, very short 1-sentence hook. Moving on from that, the next part that you would want would be what's called the okay place, right? So this is something that maybe you talk about how things were going pretty good for you. Maybe you were doing okay, or you were on the right path, but there was just something that lacked. It wasn't a great place. It wasn't the best place. It's just okay. So for example, someone might say I was in a stable relationship, but it lacked passion. So it was a stable relationship. That's good. But it lacked passion. That made it just okay. But dig a little bit deeper. It doesn't have to be that short. It can be, a few sentences if you'd like to kind of unpack more. But the whole point is just starting it off with just an okay place, right? Once you do that, the next kind of section or kind of topic that I would really want you to lean into is what's called the struggle. Okay, and this is really broken down into 2 different subparts. One would be the goal, and one would be an obstacle. So let's say that, from your okay place, you had some certain goal that you really wanted to accomplish. And it meant a lot to you, and like dig deeper into that. All the reasons why you wanted to do it, you can really dig deep there. But then present an obstacle that's standing in your way, right? So for example, let's say that you're a health coach. So, if you were a health coach, it could be that you really wanted to be healthy, or if you're a business coach, you wanted to really, run a successful business, or if you're a financial coach, you wanted to really, improve your finances, to be happier and have less stress. But maybe the obstacle for the health coach would be that, you were diagnosed with some sort of like life-threatening ailment, or maybe you're struggling to do things on your own and you were facing overwhelm, or, just stuff like that, right?
Yeah. Can I hit pause for a second?
Yeah.
Okay. So, the pattern that I heard you say when you said, like, if you're a life coach and you want, there was a time when you tried to get healthy. If you were a financial coach, there was a time when you tried to get your finances in order. Are you suggesting that with this formula, Cody, that whatever the okay place and the struggle that we're talking about is in alignment, I guess, with what we're trying to help other people with? Is that an important piece?
I would say so.
Okay.
So for example, my okay place was that, like, so if you listen to episode 1, you would know that I come from the music industry and I played in a band and all that kind of stuff. So my okay place was that, like, I was in this band, we were touring the country, I was recording with platinum record producers, playing the biggest festivals, like all of those different types of things, and everything seemed like it was like on the right track to make my dream come true, right? But the one thing that kind of stood in my way was money. So you see how, like, it didn't start with just money right off the rip. Like I talked about me, and money was the issue, and that's where things kind of start to tie in.
Okay. But if you're a financial coach, yeah, it does. I'm just going to clarify. So if you're a financial coach, we don't want to say, we don't want to talk about the time where we were in an okay place with our weight, for example, right? Unless somehow the money piece was a part of it. Because what we're ultimately trying to do, this is just me asking, by the way, not actually prescribing.
Oh, yeah.
But if what we're trying to help them with is, it has to be part of this story. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for them to be able to connect those two.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Continue on. So far, you've done the struggle where we left off at the struggle with the goal and an obstacle.
Yeah. Yep. And with the struggle too, I would just think about some questions here that, some of the questions that you can ask yourself is like, was there any sort of like inciting incident that happened to you? Or can you think of like an event that started you on your own financial journey? Like, what was that? And like, what were like 3 things that kind of like intensified that struggle? And just kind of work those answers to those questions into this part. And then once you do that, you're kind of going to lean in further into this struggle. And this goes into the third part, which is, it's called the dark night of the soul. Okay? So it's heavy,
So I'm sorry, but you said third part, and I am taking notes over here because I love when you throw out formulas. But I'm writing down number 4. So I just want to clarify, is it a third part of the struggle piece, or is it?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So technically the hook was the first part. So
okay.
Yeah, technically this would be the 4th part.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Yep. So go on. So it's the dark side of the soul, you said?
Dark night.
Dark night. Okay.
Without the K.
Okay.
So, this is the section to where you build off of your struggle, except you go even deeper. This is where you can and you should be very, very vulnerable. This is where you can really paint a picture for people. And this is where people will really, really get invested into your story. Okay, so it's almost like one thing that I did in order to get my part of this, and I might actually just read you like this little excerpt
Awesome.
from my
I was going to
post.
ask if you would.
Yeah, I will. But one thing that I did was I like closed my eyes and I physically tried to put myself back in this moment in time. And I like tried to remember like what I was thinking, how I was feeling, all the emotions that I was having, what was around me. Like it was literally like I was just replaying something in my mind. And I just started like jotting down everything that kind of came to me. And I'm not gonna lie, like rehashing that moment got me a little emotional.
I'm sure.
Yeah. But that's how I knew this was going to be good. You know, and sometimes that can be scary for people to do, especially if they kind of bury something away. But it can really make a huge impact. So, you know, when you get to this point, I want you just to think about a moment where your struggle was at its like most extreme, and like what kind of imagery was there that people can like relate with, and all that kind of stuff. So I'll read my little excerpt just to give you some context. So again, I was in a touring band, and because of my own money behavior, I ended up having to stop. If I had better money management, probably could have kept going, but I didn't at that point in my time. So this was mine. There was one. Let me see here. There was a night on one of our last tours that I did where we pulled into a gas station to rest and get some food. I opened up my wallet and I had nothing in it. I then checked my bank account and I only had $1.03. I was hundreds of miles away from home and I was completely broke. Standing in the parking lot of the gas station at 2 in the morning, I was alone in my thoughts, wondering how I got to this point with the hum of the bright fluorescent lights above me that only amplified my anxiety. My heart was racing, my chest felt heavy, and I felt the judgment of everyone around me. I went into our trailer to get some alone time, and my head fell into my hands, and the feelings of defeat started to overwhelm me. How could it be that I put everything that I had into this, and I only had $1 to my name? How much longer would it be before I could feel, at very least, comfortable with my decisions? It was at this point that I said enough is enough. I can't keep doing this to myself, and something needs to change.
Powerful.
Yep. So, with that, I really dug deep there.
Yeah.
And I used words like, I'm just going to skim through here, like amplified my anxiety, heart was racing, chest was heavy, overwhelmed, defeat, like all of those were real emotions, and I kind of tried to like paint a picture for people, like the hum of the bright fluorescent lights above me,
Yep.
like to almost feel like they're watching a movie in their head.
Yep. I heard it all. I love it. I think that's what grabbed people for sure. You know me, I'm going to ask the questions that people tend to ask. What if our story isn't nearly as dramatic or exciting or
Sure.
vulnerable? how do you still do that? Like, how do you paint such a beautiful or real, raw picture for somebody when it's not as dramatic?
Sure. So I'll start off by saying that there's people who have much more dramatic stories than I do.
Mm-hmm.
You know? That was just a period in my life. Like, I grew up in a not like a super fortunate household, but like a comfortable household. And like there was never anything of like coming from poverty or anything like that. So there's certainly people who have a lot more of like a quote unquote interesting story, or however you want to say it. But my biggest thing that I want to say to that is that like it doesn't really matter, because your story is your story. And like the biggest thing is not about what you went through, but how you felt.
Mm-hmm. It's a perfect answer.
And that's the key. If you can communicate that as to how you felt, that's the biggest thing. Not about what you went through.
Yep. So. I'm really glad that you said it, because that's exactly what I was hoping that you would say. I think a lot of times we think, you said two things that are really important. One, your story is your story. Like, no one else has that story. And two, it's really mostly about what you felt. Because while the people who are reading that post can absolutely feel like they're in a movie and watching, the rain come to, actually, I don't even know if you said rain, but you painted such a beautiful picture that people could just put themselves there. And yet it was the racing heart and the anxiety and the fear. All of those things are what people are feeling, whether they're sitting in a car, hundreds of miles away from home, or they're sitting in their own bedroom feeling super, super far apart from their spouse because they're not on the same page when it comes to some of this stuff. So it doesn't really matter the circumstances around the story. What really matters is that emotion. So I'm really glad that was what you thought to say, because I think it's really, really valuable for our listeners.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that too, because I'm sure that there are some people listening to this that probably had that question in their head, or that concern. That's just the fact. Is like, it doesn't matter what you went through; it matters about how you felt, and that's what people care about too.
Yes.
So.
Yep. And the other thing, it's kind of a bumper sticker slogan, but the idea that people don't care what you think until they they don't care what you know until they know you care, right? And so that is something that I think is so important for us to remember. And they know that you're able to care, you're able to empathize with them when you've identified that you also have gone through something that, whether it looks like their story or not, has a lot of the same emotions that are attached to what they're going through. So fantastic. So is that the end of the formula? Or is there? I'm assuming there's a little more. Okay, so let's go on to what's next.
Two more.
Okay.
2 more sections. So after you've really, really dug deep, starting with the premise of the struggle, and then really amplifying it with the dark night of the soul. What should come next is something called the shift. Right. So this is where like I said it. Like I said, I reached a point where I said enough is enough. Something
has to change.
So that's like the shift, right? And then you dig deeper on that. So, what was it for you that was the shift, that moment where you shifted mindsets, or you decided like enough is enough? And it could be something that you did, as simple as like you finally asked someone for help. It could be a book that you read. It could be something that you committed to yourself to. Like what was that action that you took that got you a different result, and that was the decision that you made which led to, and what was that decision that you made that led to action? Like what was that defining moment? That's the shift. And you can unpack that and go into detail on that. And then finally, the last section of the post would be the resolution, right? So this is where you can kind of like show off, and you're kind of building off of the shift, right? So you're like, okay, so I made this shift and things started to fall into place for me now. And because of that shift, I'm now doing this, right? So you could say like, now, my finances are, in such a better position, and here's how or whatever or why. And because of that, I felt called to then help other people, get through their struggles and have the same feeling that I'm having. And here's some results that I've been able to help people do, whether it be that you've helped hundreds of clients, or that you've helped people pay off thousands of dollars of debt, or that you've been able to help people, invest and bring in, thousands of dollars of returns, whatever it might be. Show off a little bit. Like, show that you are someone that has not only provided results for yourself, but that you've also provided some results for other people. And if you're a brand new coach and you don't have those results yet, then you can at least show that your results.
Mm-hmm. You saw the question coming up on my face, didn't you?
I
did. Wait, good thing we do this, face to face here, because you saw it. Like I could tell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that is something people are going to ask, or even if they're not brand new, what if they don't feel like, that they've gotten enough results for people? Or what if they are not in a position where they feel like their current position is brag-worthy? What do we do with that?
Well, if someone doesn't feel like they've gotten enough results, I would argue that they have gotten results, and therefore you have some results to brag about.
So maybe there's another exercise within this exercise then, right? So if somebody's sitting down and they're like, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do exactly what Cody suggested on this podcast. And I'm going to get to number 5 and I'm not going to have any clue on what I could say, and number 6 and be able to brag about myself. So maybe the exercise within the exercise is, before you do all that, sit down and really take inventory on what you have done, not just for yourself, but also for other people. And it doesn't have to be someone who paid you. Right? You can brag about results you get from someone who hasn't paid you yet. You can brag about any movement. You don't have to have been to the arrival, the destination, in order to talk about how you got from where you were to where you are right now. It's okay to still have places you want to go, to be able to brag right now about where you are. So maybe that's part of the exercise first, that if you are worried about when you get to the spot that you're not going to have anything good to say, maybe you do that first. Take inventory.
And really, like, I think a good way to even just start doing that is just make it simple and write down, break out a pen and paper and write down 1, 2, 3, and just fill in those blanks. What are 3 accomplishments that you're proud of in regards to your story or what you're doing with your coaching practice? Like, what's your top 3 things that you're like, I'm really proud of myself for this, and just start there, And if you have trouble feeling like you accomplished something, you're probably lying to yourself. Even the smallest accomplishment can mean something, can mean a lot to someone else.
Yeah. And I think too, I know this is surprising, but I think sometimes it's not just numbers, right? I mean, I had a client in my office yesterday who, they invested thousands of dollars to work with me. And the husband, who was originally kind of hesitant to do such a thing, he's, in his mind, he's trying to figure out what that return on investment is, right? And so, and he's very analytical. So he's looking at like, what has shifted in our actual financial situation. And in his mind, he's not the one who does all of the books, so he doesn't know some of the stuff that his wife knows yet, because we're still working on getting them on the same page. But in his mind, he wants to be able to count like how much debt has been paid off, or what is their shift in whatever. But right now, quite frankly, we're still trying to get them to a positive cash flow, get them out of a negative cash flow. And he came to this insight last night that one of the returns on investment for him so far has not been numbers at all. It's really been saving himself from himself, right? It's been, he's a lot more aware of some of the things that he's doing now. And so had we not been working together for the last month and a half, he probably would have spent an additional $10,000 to $20,000 on opportunities that were abounding, right? That he would have just let slip through because he wasn't being intentional with his money. So I think as you guys are doing some of this exercise, do realize that just because you haven't necessarily shifted the needle for somebody in terms of numbers yet, if you've helped shift their mindset, then you have shifted because they would have slid backwards. And so technically this is a positive result for you. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
throw that out there because I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in, but they haven't really paid off their debt yet. We see all these other coaches bragging about, oh, well, I helped my client pay off $4,000 or whatever. And it's so easy to compare. And we need to make sure we're not getting stuck in that comparison trap and assuming we're not helping our clients.
Yeah. And even like, if you're coaching a couple and their communication or their relationship was just really bad
Yes.
when you first started, and because of your coaching, it's improved astronomically, that's a huge accomplishment.
Huge.
There's a lot of married couples out there like that.
Yes.
Maybe someone came to you with a ton of anxiety and overwhelm because of their money, and now they feel more confident. They have a little bit more peace with it. They have more clarity with it. That's a huge accomplishment.
Yep.
So it doesn't have to be measurable.
That's right.
So
thank you for letting me throw that in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
Of course. So there's that, the resolution. And with all of this stuff that you're kind of bragging about now, right? You can really wrap up this post by essentially like buttoning it up with a call to action. Okay. So basically, you would build off of that resolution, build off of the bragging, build off of all the results that you've gotten for yourself or your clients or whatever, and be like, hey, if this is something that you want as well, reach out. Do some sort of call to action to get them to take action, to actually shoot you a message or comment on your post or whatever. It could be as simple as if you want to feel confident with your money, drop a comment that says confident, and I'll DM you. Something as simple as that. But something there because you put so much work into this that you want to at least be like, and hey, if you want this, let me know.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's the whole thing. But one last thing I want to say is that if you haven't noticed this yet, I'm going to point it out to you now. Through every single section of going through this formula, you'll notice that each section builds off of the previous section. Right? So the okay place, that's where maybe you start, aside from the hook. The hook is kind of like an overarching statement. So if we start with the okay place and we move into the struggle is there because it's not a great place, it's an okay place. And there's something there that was a roadblock. And from the struggle, we then are able to amplify that and build off of that to create the dark night of the soul. And from that bottom of the pit and that dark night of the soul, you have a shift. And from that shift, you then get results. And from those results, you then start helping people. And from helping people, you ask for a call to action. Everything is building off of each other, every single part.
Yep.
So that's the formula.
Yeah, I love it. And I think one of the biggest differences between this and, like you said earlier today, a lot of times we just focus on results. And I think focusing on results for people is really important when we're talking about whether you focus on results that they're going to get or dollars per hour. It's so important to focus on the results that they're going to get. But I'm seeing here that it's not just results that they're going to get without the emotion. Like that's what makes this a little bit different. Because if you're just focusing on the static results, it feels stale, right? It's like, okay, so you're going to be able to help me do X, Y, and Z, but you don't understand me. This formula allows them to see that you do understand them, or at least you are human.
Yeah.
and that
that's
you're
the
relatable.
Biggest thing is like, hey, like you are a person.
Yeah. Yeah. You're relatable. They can say, okay, his story is a little bit different than mine, but his feelings are very similar. And so if he can get those results for himself, being a human being, someone who has these emotions, then I do have more confidence that he can get those results for me as well. And so I think that's one of the biggest differences. You're still focusing on results here, but what you're adding in is the emotion. And I think it's a lovely, brilliant.
Yeah. So again, um, my closing thoughts and suggestions on this. I know that it was a lot to unpack, and you're probably going to have to go back and re-listen to certain sections of
Yep.
this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
maybe several times, and that's okay. We like hanging out with you. Um, but what I'll say is, don't try and rush through this.
Yeah.
Put some time, put some effort into it, and make it something that maybe you've written something before, whether it be a post or an email or a blog or whatever. But really almost try and make this like the most intentional piece of literature that you've ever written.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I entered my mindset when I was crafting my own, and that's why I took a week on this. It didn't take me a week to write it, but it took me a week to write it, process it, edit it, refine it, change out certain words, using synonyms, all those different types of things, because I was really being intentional. I really wanted this to count.
Mm-hmm.
So do that. And another thing that I will say too is that if you do this and you don't see massive results in regards to how many likes you get, how many comments you get, how many people reach out to you, all of that kind of stuff, do not get discouraged. Okay? Reason being is because, especially if this is your first time doing something like this, or you're just now starting to establish yourself and get yourself off the ground with social media,
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take time.
Yeah.
It takes time for people to understand who you are and to trust you and to be interested in you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just like a magical pill that you take and all your problems are solved. This is something that you're going to have to do probably a couple times over the course of several months. But when you do build that credibility, and you do build that trust, and you do build that interest, the results will come. So just stay consistent with it, and just constantly show up for yourself and for the people that you serve.
Yeah, and I'm going to double down if I can and just say that, I mean, with the way that Facebook and Twitter and all of the social media stuff plays with algorithms, just because someone hasn't liked it doesn't mean they might not have even seen it. Like, that's something to think about, so don't feel like you put a week into this and then you drop it once and you don't get the results that you want, and so you're like, oh well, that didn't work, freaking Cody lied to me on the podcast. No, I mean, you go ahead and feel free to continue to put that on, especially if you don't have a lot of followers yet, and you're trying to build that a little bit. Put it in different places so that you can just kind of test the waters in different places, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever really. But don't feel like just because someone didn't see it right now, that doesn't mean that they will. I mean, people are busy, and this especially, we are in a world where it has to be short in order for people to really digest it. And if that hook, I mean, try doing the exact same post but maybe a different hook if you're not getting the results you want, because if they don't read that hook and they're not hooked, then they're not gonna read a whole post. Does that make sense? But if you change up the hook and then they come back and they see it, they're not going to be like, oh, she already posted that, because they wouldn't have read it in the first place. So just keep that in mind as you're getting discouraged. Don't get discouraged.
Yeah, and one other thing too, and I can say this confidently because I do this all the time. I'm a scroller.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really interact or like a lot of posts.
Mm-hmm.
I just see something, and if I like it, I'm like, oh, that's cool,
Mm-hmm.
and then I keep going.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of people like that. Actually, if I interact with you, it's because I really liked it, and I'm being intentional with actually picking up my thumb and clicking that like button. Otherwise, I may have seen it, I may have liked it, but you would never know.
Right.
You never know. And there's a lot of people like that. So even if you don't get, quote unquote, a lot of interaction or engagement,
yes,
that does not mean that people aren't reading it. That does not mean that people aren't seeing it. And that does not mean that people aren't connecting with it.
that's correct.
It just means that they're keeping it to themselves. And that's fine too. So don't get discouraged by the metrics either.
And again, remember, this will be the last thing I say. Remember, this is a very vulnerable topic for people. Money, it's been said that people would rather talk about what they do in the bedroom than they would about their finances, because it is such a private thing for them. And anytime you're on social media, everyone's watching, right? So and Facebook tells me, like, if my husband clicks like on something, or if he comments on something, and it'll tell me if my friend over here says, something on someone's post. So it's kind of vulnerable when you know that if you do take that extra step to push the like button, everyone else might know that. Right? They can see that. And when you do that, it's like they can get in their head and be like, well, does someone think that I relate to this because I also have money problems? Or do they think that I'm just going to be supportive? And so, just remember that's whether they're just scrollers or not, this is a very different topic. And so they very well might be like, I don't want to make it super public that I'm looking, but they're still watching. And when they're ready, they will reach out to you privately.
I've had people reach out to me and they said something along the lines of like, I've been thinking about reaching out to you for a while now. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, that's news to me because I don't see you interact with anything. I would have no clue.
Yep.
I would have zero clue that you even had interest.
I've had the same thing happen.
But they're just keeping it to themselves.
That's right. That's right. Yep, I hear you on that. So very good. Well, Cody, thank you so much as always for bringing such value to this podcast. I love the formula that you brought for everybody. I agree that people are probably going to have to go back and take notes, and we will go ahead and add some stuff in the show notes to make it a little bit easier, including your actual post so they can see it, the amazing picture that you were able to have. And I think I'm ready for whatever's next.
Yep, me too. So get after it, guys.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for tuning in, you guys. We'll see you next week. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Coaches Podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Sizemore Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our host by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes and join our growing group of like-minded coaches on Facebook. And until next time, happy coaching. Music provided by Summer School.